as I was studying Pastor Alvin, I was like, maybe we need to go all the way through October with this. I just felt like there's just so much to unpack. Um, but I really do believe, I kept asking the Lord about this, and I really do believe that there is a new culture here in this community, that a lot of it is going to stem from this idea, concept of Sabbath. And, I'm not necessarily saying that we're going to be doing Shabbat dinners. I'm not necessarily saying that, none of us are going to be walking, to anywhere but whatever's near our house. I'm not necessarily saying that that's the Sabbath that we're talking about. Um, but I'm hoping that we can look at just four little places in Scripture, is right now, and who knows, if the boss says, keep going with Sabbath, um, he's like, as long as it's good tonight, then it'll be fine. Um, but we're gonna look at we're gonna look at we're gonna look at Genesis 1 and 2 this evening. Next week we're gonna look at Exodus through Deuteronomy. We're gonna dance a little bit with the major and minor prophets. Then we're gonna talk about the Gospels in the third week, and then the last we're gonna talk about the epistles, with maybe a slight nod to Revelation. So I'm teaching all four, so sorry that we don't have good diversity in this yet, but I'm hoping that we will moving forward. I just want to say a few things about it. Uh, it's really hard to be comprehensive with this idea of Sabbath. You've probably heard people talk about Sabbath. There's been a trend, I think, in the larger churches in the universe that are remembering that Sabbath is super imperative for our life and our living, and hopefully we can unpack some of that tonight. Strangely, for me personally, I had forgotten about this sabbatical that was automated in the 7 years of being a pastor in this church. I mean, guys, I wrote the policy, but I forgot about it. Um, and I wrote it for other people, not just for me. I wrote it like for the posterity of the community. And the Lord like really brought it into my heart. But I had like 2 or 3 friends that are not even in ministerial circles, um, like nonprofit people, business people, and they all at the same time talked about, so yeah, I'm gonna come out of my job, and then I'm gonna have 3 months where I'm not gonna work. Like I'm gonna like just kind of take a sabbatical from working before I start like another position. And it kept showing up, and then I had this moment where it's like, I think there's actually a policy in our guidebook that talked about after 7 years, a pastor is awarded a minimum of like a 6-week sabbatical. And so I think God like has been in all of this in some really interesting ways. And I think that there's lots of language that I'm going after, hopefully tonight. But I think that this picture is probably the best picture I can give you of Sabbath in a nutshell right now. And hopefully we'll unpack it more. People are like, how's it been for reentry, back into your job and everything? And the metaphor continues to arise, and it's that the whole world is running, and I am at a slow walk. And that is really our hope in our journey in this, that we would recognize that how God is asking us to live, it is so counterintuitive, it is so countercultural, it is so subversive to the nature of the world, and it will be extremely uncomfortable. Because we have all been formed by a whole lot of things that are not the way God designed them to be formed. And you've probably heard me say this, but I feel like this is like a term that's going to come up a lot, which is that from the moment you were born, you've been formed by everything in this world. So right away, the moment you're born, there is a secondary formation of you as an individual, of your heart, your soul, your mind, your body, from the moment you're born. Some people would say in the womb, you're already being formed because environment, etc. But there is a first formation that happened when God designed you and took the sperm and the egg, and he made that happen. Your mom and your dad didn't do it. He made that happen. And that first formation is what we're talking about. And so as we look at Genesis, we really are trying to come back to some of these first formation of the universe and ask ourselves the question, can we be formed back to the way, or if you want, forward to the way that he wants us formed in? I do not know how to do this fully. I've been attempting for 6 weeks. I wish that I could tell you right now that I've spent years and years and years figuring this out. I've had 6 weeks. I took one class in graduate school on the Sabbath by a beautiful, crazy, wild professor who taught on Sabbath in 8 weeks. And it was the deepest dive into Sabbath. And most of my resources that I've used came from that class. And I would say that it began to put like a seed in me then of so much of what's beginning to come forward now. His name is Michael Palmer. He's no longer alive, but he was just a beautiful professor that carried a level of peace that I have not known, like with people. I mean, he was immovable because he was so grounded in this kind of Sabbath reality. He never left it. And you felt it when you were with him. And, you know, over the sabbatical time that I just had, I read 8 books on Sabbath. Not an overachiever at all. Plus a bunch more because I just love reading and I had all this time. But I wanted to know, why is God calling us into this? And I'm still discovering it. And I'm hoping, more than anything, I'm hoping that you will feel the invitation into it as I've been feeling. And that you'll recognize that ultimately an invitation is the most important thing to talk about when we're talking about Sabbath, because it's truly an invitation. And so I'm hoping that we can work through what the invitation is for us in Genesis 1 and 2 tonight. But as you well know me, we have to start with some definitions, because if we're talking about all these different words that are in our head, but we don't know them, it's important for us to come to the same kind of ideas. So I'd like right now, 1 or 2, 3 people in a group, probably 3 is a good number. I would love for you to answer the question of, what is Sabbath? Whatever you know, it's fine. And also, what is not Sabbath? Because that's a really good way to define a word, is by telling us what it is and what it isn't. So let's take about 5 minutes, and I want you to get in groups of 3, and I want you to answer the question, come up with some words. What is Sabbath? What is not Sabbath? Okay? Ready, set, go. 5 minutes. I'm going to be really strict on time so we can get through all the content. All right. I'd like to hear some words that you guys came up with of what is Sabbath and what is not Sabbath. Okay, Leslie? Okay. To refresh our memory of Him. It's beautiful. What's another one from this sector? Any other ones? That was good. Okay, we're going to go center. What we got in here?
Invitation to rest in wonder.
An invitation to rest in wonder. What about this little dance over here?
We have a lot of words.
Throw a few out.
Presentness.
Presentness. Guys, this pen is a little, wonky.
Delight.
Presentation. Presentness. Okay. Delight.
Unhurried.
Unhurried. What about what it's not? The next one, what is not, is the same. What it is not.
That's good.
Okay, guys, I'm just going to tell you that Leslie is the star student right now, because that is such a good word. Other words, what it's not.
There's another blue there.
What else is Sabbath not? To-do list. Anything else?
I put stop up there. Just the word stop.
Oh, stop. Love it. Faith and trust. Great. Come on, one more for like what it's not. Inactivity. Inactivity. I like that. That's good. So, I had two words that I was using as I was prepping. What is Sabbath? And I used the word inhabiting. We're going to unpack that. What it is not, vacating. And I want to talk about this for a second because the reason these two words came up for me is every single time we interacted with somebody during our Sabbath time, two questions came up. Number one, so what are you doing? And we're like, that's the point, is not doing. So, but it's always like, what are you doing? Second was, so how's your vacation? And we're like, well, it's not vacating. But I want to talk about this for a second because I think this is really important. First of all, the word vacating literally means to make void or to annul or to be empty. Now that's going to make a whole lot more sense when we take it to the scriptures. It actually goes so far to say that vacating is to leave or abandon. Now when someone goes on sabbatical or practicing Sabbath, we do not want them making void their life, annulling their existence, leaving or abandoning anything.
Yeah.
We do not want them to be empty and to be void. But somehow our cultural reality comes to us and says, we just all need a vacation. We all need to vacate. Here's the crazy thing. It's come into the church where salvation is about vacating. Why? I just want to go to heaven. Just give me my ticket to heaven. It's a vacation. Get out of jail free card. We've preached it. We've promulgated it. It is the mindset. And not only is it that, but it's the end. They always say, think about the end in mind. And the end in mind, if you were to end all of the world, we think we're vacating. We're leaving this space. The Bible can be further from that.
Yeah.
So we're totally drinking the Kool-Aid of consumerism.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, consumerism says, I have worked really, really hard, so now I don't have to.
The problem is that when you vacate, what do people say when they come back from a vacation? I needed a vacation from my vacation. Because the cycle that living and vacating, it's that you are empty and void, and then you go do a bunch of things thinking that you will not be empty and void at the end of it, and you always end up empty and void.
Yep.
So then you maintain a cycle of emptiness
Yep.
and voidness. I go so far to say that you begin to live in a decreational cycle that's antithetical, it's opposite to the creational life of God.
Yeah.
Now, I know we don't think about it in those ways when we say it, but it is what actually happens for most people. Like I said, I think there's exceptions. I'm not necessarily saying that you should not go on a vacation. There is a time and a place for a vacation. But when we're talking about what this idea of Sabbath and what God's calling us into, it's not that. You can do that, go to Disney, have a blast, but there is a different kind
Yeah.
of life that can be found. Contrary to that, I think the invitation, is moving towards sharing life
Yeah.
with God
Yeah.
and with everything God has created, because everything that God has created has life.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, the desire is to not vacate, but to inhabit. To find as much life as I can possibly get in me and get into it as fully as I can possibly get into the life. It's funny because one of the many authors that I wrote, the king of all of the conversations on Sabbath, if you ever research Sabbath ever, every single person comes back to this book by Abraham Joshua Heschel, who is a Jewish philosopher. And it's an amazing book. It's super good, super wild, because it's just like Judaism in a way that you don't think about it. And he said Sabbath is a day for the sake of life. That the whole idea is that it's for the sake of life, your life and everyone else's. Because living in a vacating reality, becoming empty and void, means that everywhere you go, you are just increasing emptiness and void. And then when other people are living in emptiness and void and they come into your existence, they just dump more emptiness and void into you.
Yeah.
It has a profound impact on how we exist. That if we're not living, inhabiting life, then we're living an empty, formless reality, which is super hard to get out of, truthfully. The context of all of this, why habitation, is Genesis 1. That in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void. It was vacated. But the Spirit of God was hovering, this is a very inhabiting picture, is hovering over all of the formlessness and the void. And then God says, let there be light. And there is. And then there's a whole creational part that basically God never leaves. God never abandons. God separates. He orders. He puts things where they're supposed to be. He sets things in motion. He sets time in motion. He places spaces in the world. All of these things happen. And at the end of all of that, he comes to basically sit in all of it on the last day. And I think that it's hard for us to really realize this, because with such a consumeristic culture and mindset, even if we are not drunk on that, we still sip it regularly. Because we basically buy everything. Like, everything. Like, we don't farm, ground, plants, raise the plants, eat the plant. Like, we don't go through the process of inhabiting, which is, there's no judgment. We have to accept this so we can accept the life God's inviting us to. We just walk to the store, we're empty and void, and we grab something. And we put our money in exchange, and that's it. But I think that there's this beautiful invitation for moving from consumerism to receptivism. Use that word. And it means that Sabbath is you coming into the place where you are open to receiving anything that comes your way. Now listen, you're up in the charismatic church. I used to hear this phrase all the time. You better be careful what you open yourself to, brother. You better watch those gates on your eyes and your ears and your mouth. You better not be in those places those feet shouldn't walk. And you better not put those hands to do the things you... And I grew up with that. But what I realized is that inadvertently, that was teaching me this idea of vacating. Because it meant that I thought that everything was going to distort my life. It basically means that I think that emptiness and void is more powerful than a life that is truly filled with God.
Yeah.
Oh, come on.
Yep.
I can feel that rustle and bristle in all of your hearts. Because we grew up supping on this picture that I have to avoid everything to be holy. I have to avoid everything to find God, to hear God, to experience God. And I'm like, actually, that's not really how it works. It's all His. Now, plenty of people can empty it and vacate it and it have no life in it. They can steal it, rob it, kill it.
Yeah.
Hello. Steal it, rob it, kill it. Sound like something? Or they can acknowledge that nothing can be stolen from me. Nothing can be robbed from me. You know what's a little pet peeve of mine? And I'm sorry if this is you. But I was really thinking about this a lot in the Sabbath time. The phrase, I don't know if I have energy for that. Do you understand the empty lie that you're believing when you think, I don't have energy for that? You're basically deciding that you actually don't have life inside of you. You're actually denying the reality that God made you to have all of the energy that you need.
Yeah.
If what? You're inhabiting your existence. If you're living fully, you're not empty, you're not void. And so I'm like, Lord, how, because then of course we're like, well, how do you do this? How do you do this? And I think that this idea of inhabiting something, it really does mean to dwell in something, to have it, to hold it, to reside in it, and that we can find a residence in God that changes everything. I think it's fascinating because one famous theologian, he said that when you begin to live in this habitating way, you perpetuate the cycle of life. Once you say yes to life, everywhere you go is life. Everyone you talk to is life. Everything is life because you are connected to life endlessly. And so he says that the Sabbath then begins to open up everything for the future. Not because it's in the future, but because it's already fully there in the life that you have in God. So Sabbath is basically an invitation to dwell in life and all of the life that looks like in the world. And it's in two major forms that we experience life. And I'd say there's a third form if you really want to be super technical. The third technical form is all of creation. Because you have the ability to interact with all of the life that exists in the universe. You can interact with the life of the trees, you can interact with the life of the animals, you can interact with the life of the planets moving through. We have the ability to interact with that life. And then we have the ability to interact with another person. So that's another form of how we can inhabit, engage the Sabbath, and then obviously with God. So we get it really simple. It's God, others, all creation. And the goal for us is to come into a place where we can live fully in the life of all of those things at once.
Yeah.
So that the little life that Jeremy has, and the little life that Cassie has, and the little life that John has, and the little life I have, that when we are actually holding it and not living in the emptiness and the voidness, something greater, an increase of life happens.
Yeah.
So when someone says to me, I'm not sure if I have the energy. I actually had this conversation with my wife because she's one of those people who actually says, I don't have energy for that. I looked at her one day and I said, then who in your life has the energy to give you? And I mean that.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm giving her plenty of life friends, I promise. But there is that picture that we're having to come into this moment and acknowledge to say, wow, I am not aware of how much life is available all the time, every single day.
Yeah. It's so good.
And so I think that what ends up happening is we're like, well, then all of a sudden our vacating consumeristic, always fearful of being empty, some would call it a scarcity mindset, seeps in.
Yep.
And when that seeps in, I become what psychologists are now calling anxious. That when I have a scarcity mindset, I will live in anxiousness. And it's funny because literally it means narrowness. That you will live in a narrow way, which makes a whole lot of sense. That if life means that you're living in a very full and big way, that when you're living empty and void, it's a very small way to live. And because of the beautiful God that we serve, we always have one tiny, the Jewish people call it like the spark of creation in us. Because we're made in His image, and no matter how much emptiness and void you live in, you cannot lose that.
Yeah.
Which is so beautiful. There's always a little chance that you can find life again because He gave it to you. You did not give it to yourself. And when that happens, everything becomes different. Now the tension in all of this is like how you're like, okay, God, relationships, all of creation, that sounds like, so much. But here's the interesting thing. That when you begin to live in this way, where you start to acknowledge that in order to have a Sabbath life, it means that your life is acknowledging the fullness of relationship that's available. That relationship is fully available in every way possible. I was really considering my journey, my story. I did a 4-day silent retreat during the sabbatical. And while I was on that Sabbath retreat, one of the things that I felt like the Lord started highlighting to me was this certain scarcity that kept happening again and again and again. And it was the scarcity of, and it's strange, my story is always this, that I give more love than people return. So I wrote down in my little journal, one of the greatest pains of my life is unrequited love. And it was like in friendships, it was in like girls, it was, you name it, I was like, I'm giving more love and no one's ever giving that love back. And the Lord really began to come and say to me, but Jason, don't you realize that because there was such a lack, because there was such an emptiness, that you had to be more open to all of the other relationships that were in your world at that time. And I started to process that, like, the moment that I would serve a professor really, really diligently, and then he was like, oh, you're brilliant. I want you to be my teacher's assistant. And, I'm vacuuming his car, and I'm getting him a poppy seed muffin and a latte, and then I come and say, will you mentor me? Will you disciple me? And he looks at me and goes, I can't. And I'm confused because I'm like, I've given all the life that I can give to this guy. I'm doing runs to the dry cleaners, and I'm doing runs to the, to Jiffy Lube for his oil changes, and he could not give anything back. I was so pained by that. But at the same time, when I'm like, Lord, there was no mentor, there was no one to help me, the Lord opened up because of finding life, and because of opening up to the world of relationships, I started realizing that there were people in my life in that moment that maybe they were not 15 years older than me, they were a year older than me or 2 years younger than me, they could disciple me also or mentor me also because I was open to the life that they had. There is no lack in the way God created everything. If you're in lack, you're living from formless and void, and the mindset will prevent you from actually finding rest. Because rest is the posture of relationship. Why do I know that? Because when you have a relationship that is full of life, it always feels restful. Everyone's like, I don't know about that. Most of my relationships don't feel restful. Then I'm like, then probably one or both of you are blocking the life from flowing out of you because of a scarcity mindset, because of consumeristic, always thinking that I'm empty, and not being receptive enough to receive the life of another.
Yeah.
Come on. Come on.
This is foundational because when you go and you read that God creates all of these things in Genesis 2, 1 and 2, he's looked at it, he's done it all, he's finished the work. And then it says, and he rested. Well, he didn't leave the garden. He didn't just like ditch Adam and Eve. This whole mindset of like, oh yeah, it's Adam and Eve, like, you know, they went over here, and I'm like, it doesn't say that. God is walking, engaging, and moving in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that? Like it says he's moving around in the garden. He's there. He's available. And all of it takes is a simple acknowledgement of I'm feeling empty. Boom. There's life there. I think for us, like when we come into the mindset of what does it mean to Sabbath, it's not just to take a day off. It's coming into this place where I'm starting to acknowledge all of the places in me that the life is not flowing into. Mm-hmm. That I'm acknowledging that in my relationships, sometimes life is not flowing from those places, and I'm wondering if it's because I'm not receiving. I have a very dear friend of mine, and I love him with my whole heart, but he's very different than me, and a lot of times, like, I'll go to visit him and I'll start feeling anxious because he doesn't quite do relationship the way I do relationship, which I know I'm also like a little strange. And so I always tell Dee, I'm like, I don't know, like, am I his homie? Am I just like a pity friend? Like, it's so weird. It's only with this one person that I've ever felt like this, like, And Dee looked at me the other day because we were talking about it again, and she said to me, hey, Jason, do you think that the issue is not him, it's you? Because you are not willing to receive whatever he's offering you. And the emptiness that you feel in that space between you is because you have assumed that the life is not there.
Yeah, come on.
I was shook in my being. I was like, don't you love that? You love when that life comes into you real firm, you know, because it shows you how dead you've been. And come on, somebody. You just realize how, and that's really the truth, right?
Yeah.
That Sabbath,
Yeah.
although it sounds like this beautiful, wonderful, oh, we're living with God and roaming the mountains with Him. I'm like, a lot of times it's Him coming into your life and saying, there's a lot of dead, empty things here.
Yeah.
But those dead, empty things here are not the end.
Yeah.
And they're not actually how you have to exist.
Mm-hmm.
That in so many ways you can be receptive to receive life from God and life from others.
Yeah.
You can even receive life from being in creation. Literally it says the glory of God. You know, all of the earth is, you know, revealing God's glory. I'm like, what do you think glory is but life?
Yeah.
It's the weight and the essence of who God is. You can find life all the time. We're just not looking for it. Too obsessed with our scarcity mindset. Too protective of being too receptive. We're afraid. And so ultimately, like, the invitation is that the Sabbath is an opportunity to engage the presence of God and to be recognizing that He is open to relationship with you. Like, all of creation He creates, 6 days, 7th day, He goes, I'm open to relationship with humanity. That's kind of great. You're like, where are you getting this? You're making this stuff up. Well, if you want to go read the lexicon about the word Sabbath in Genesis 2, verse 2, it literally says, I'm going to read it so that you don't. The primary idea appears to be that someone has sat down or has sat still. For what purpose? Well, not labor, not to plant anything, not from trying to progress, going further, not for the idea of journeying a little bit more. And this one was very interesting to me. Not to be an elder sitting in the gate. And we don't often think about elders sitting in the gate, but in the ancient Near Eastern world, an elder sitting in the gate was a judge. Isn't that interesting? That when we begin to step into Sabbath, what we find is that our working and our striving doesn't give us relationship, that our fruitfulness does not give us relationship, that our lack of progress does not give us relationship, our lack of journeying further does not give us relationship, and our judgments don't get us relationship.
Yeah.
Sabbath is devoid of judgment because the judgment was already served in the first 6 days. It was all the life was shuffled, moved, and changed around. And then God says, he sees it and he says, it is good. It is good. It is good. That's the judgment.
Yeah.
That lives over our life. That we would begin to acknowledge that when I'm in relationship, I'm seeing all the goodness.
Yeah.
This isn't some Tony Perkins message. This is the way God built us to acknowledge and receive the good life.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we've embraced the bad life a lot. We've been empty a lot. And that's really hard. So what do? What are some of the things? I only have a few things just to encourage us with. The first, I think, is just a threefold mindset process of this relationship, of this life. And the first is to remember the Creator. I really love that a lot of times when you read about Sabbath, the word observe comes up a lot. Do you observe the Sabbath? And there's this observational reality where if you start to think about God, what do you think about? If you just took 3 seconds of your day and asked yourself the question, what is God like? What would you say? And does it align with what is not Sabbath reality of vacating, a God who's absent, a God who is judging, a God who is empty, a God who can't provide for me, whatever your ish with God, who doesn't hear me, doesn't acknowledge me? Or is he a God who is fully habitating? He's fully involved. He's fully present. He fully sees. He sometimes acknowledges things the way you want him to, and sometimes he doesn't. But it doesn't mean he's not fully in it. That's the first thing. We have to observe and remember him. It's really powerful. One of the authors that I was reading over the summer named Kasuke Koyama. He's a Japanese theologian, and he says this. I love this so much. We are the Lord's. We do not live and die for ourselves. Our life must not be one of isolation or egocentricity. Our life must be one of sharing.
Yeah.
And when you remember God, you remember everything he shared.
Yeah.
And you start to remember all the other people who shared like God shared. And then you know what? You also remember all the people who didn't share. But you're still acknowledging the matter of shared life, the matter of relationship, the matter of resting spaces that make you receptive to whatever relationships come your way. It's kind of mind-blowing. The second thing I think, in order to receive relationships that we have to do beyond remembering the Creator, is we have to cease our speaking. You know what's really interesting to me is that all throughout day 1 through 6 of the creation narrative, on day 7, God doesn't speak.
Hmm.
He didn't say anything. It just
Yeah.
says he rested. Which again, this was my thought in it. I was like, okay, so if he's not speaking, then is he listening?
Hmm.
What happens for me when I start engaging my mouth shutting up? Oh, I'm praying about X, Y, and Z all the time. Have you shut your mouth?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're not getting the life that you're looking for because your mouth is empty and void. And the endlessness is happening instead of saying something as simple as, well, you know what, I've prayed about this a lot and nothing's happened. Have you asked somebody else to pray for you? What if they have the words of life that you need that you don't have?
Yeah.
Why do you expect that it's all inside of you? If you expect that it's all inside of you and you expect that you have everything, then you've stopped believing that God has everything and that he has disseminated his life into all of the world and every person. And if you have it all, then you are God. We need one another to maybe give us the words to speak. It's beautiful. That invitation for us is to learn to be more attentive to what's happening when others speak to us. That's when you a lot of times find that rest.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, as I was processing, I was like, what's the phrase you just keep reciting over and over again in your head? Can you stop that too? I'm not good enough. I haven't done this much. He'll never find me. Whatever it is, can you just stop that for a second and put a little Sabbath pause on it? A little Sabbath stop on it. And say, you know what?
Yeah.
I need to hear somebody else.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Luca. It's a Disney movie. There's this really beautiful moment where fear is so filling these two characters. And the one character looks at the other one and he says, Silencio, Bruno. And he's basically saying, be quiet. Like, that voice inside is saying you can't, and you won't, and you shouldn't, and you couldn't. He's like, be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so powerful because you see what happens when somebody really acknowledges that this thing that I'm reciting is not life. It is a vacating.
Yeah.
It is a scarcity mindset. It is an empty and void that needs the words of God to be spoken into it. It needs the relationship of God, the relationship of the people of God to be engaged in my life to give me what I need when I don't have it.
Yeah.
Sabbath does this.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of crazy because we don't think about Sabbath doing that. We think about it's like, oh, we're just not doing anything. So often.
Mm-hmm.
But let me go one step further. Third mindset that has to be there to actually receive what God's doing in the realm of Sabbath is relate. You actually have to put yourself in the place to find connection.
Yeah.
Like you have to talk to people, you have to listen to people. And sometimes you realize that you're not just relating, but you're relaying. Sometimes you read your Bible that morning and you're talking to somebody and you realize that life that God gave you that morning, it wasn't just for you. It was to give to somebody else that day. And there's a relating and a relaying that happens when you're living in life. When you are not thinking that you're scarce, you'll give everything away. If you're afraid and you're living in a scarce mindset, you'll never tell anybody that verse that you read that was super encouraging. You'll never share the wisdom that maybe changed your life with a perfect stranger. Oh, if I give my magic away, then all of a sudden I will be empty and have nothing. But there is something to be said about how we get to come into this place of realizing that these relationships that God's put around us, whether it's in church, whether it's in a common table, hello, shout out to common tables coming up in October, that there is life to be found in these things.
Mhm.
There is a life to be found when you talk to your barista. And listen, you're expecting that you're going to give them life, but what happens when you live a Sabbath reality where you're expecting God to give life through them to you?
Yeah. That's good.
Because we're not receptive. We think we're receptive, but we're really not. We're receptive when we come into church and we're in worship and it's good and powerful, or we're in our prayer closet and it's so good, and we're receptive in limit moments.
Mm.
And because we limit our receptivity, we limit our relationality, we limit our rest, and then we feel empty and void.
Yeah. Yep. That's good.
But all of a sudden, you can have a moment all day, every day. You can live Sabbath reality all the time by being receptive. It doesn't have to poison you either, because you're with God. And he's like, my life is greater than any non-life that might try to come in your way.
Mm.
Yeah.
I don't believe that. Because we're still buying into the idea that somebody's going to rob me and kill me and destroy me. And we've given the enemy of our souls far too much
Yeah.
of our hearts and our minds and our ability to relate.
Yeah.
Come on. Yeah.
When Jesus said, I have come to give you life.
Yeah.
That means in every area.
Mhm.
It's only you that's preventing the life from coming.
Mhm.
And it's really just learning to be so paused, so stopped, that you're not just stopping and blocking everything. That's not it. But you're stopping and you're open
Yeah.
to receiving that it might come to you in a different way. I heard a friend of mine told me a crazy story where basically they were praying about something very specific and nothing happened, and then this other thing happened and they're like, yeah, we were kind of like, this isn't really it. And then they opened their hearts to it and they realized that it was actually everything that they needed, even though it's not exactly what they thought,
Mhm.
because they were receptive. And when he told me his story, I was like, man, that's really, really powerful, and that's really, really amazing. And I was like, I wonder how non-receptive I'm being about these certain things that I'm praying about, because they haven't come exactly the way I want them, in my narrow little way, which is an empty and void scarcity mindset.
Mm.
And so this crazy thing happened, which is like such a cool testimony, and I was like, how am I going to tell this? But felt like, sure, why not? Because it's not just for me, it's for all of your life. A friend of a friend reached out and said, hey, we have a place that we'd like to rent. Are you guys looking for anything? And I'm like, we just signed a lease in July, so not really. But I stopped for a moment. And you know what I thought? I thought, I'm going to honor my friend because it's his friend. And I'm going to honor the relationship that I have with my friend. And I'm going to honor the relationship that my friend has with his friend. And I'll just go look at the place. So this is on launch Sunday, like 2 weeks ago.
Mhm.
So I walk out, I get home, I'm like, well, Dee, they said I can go look at it right now. You know, she's like, all right, just go look, I guess. I mean, we were just like, all right, like I'm going to just honor a relationship that I have with my friend because it's his friend. And I walk into this townhouse. And like the moment I walk into this townhouse, number one, it's 2 minutes from my house. So I'm like, that's cool. And I literally am like thinking, I'm like, I think we could live here for 5 years. It's the very first thought in my mind. Now, we've lived in the one that we're in for 7 now. So I think we could live in this house for 5 years. But I'm like, there's just no way. It's way bigger. It's so much nicer. And there's no way. Again, vacating. When you start to experience the life, because you've been so drunk on the non-life, you will run back to non-life real quick. And I sat there and I'm like, wait. There's something going on here. I know there is. And I'm like, but I don't know how it's going to work. And I'm like, okay, I had all my contingencies. I'm like, well, I read my lease. I'm like, I have to give my landlord 60 days notice. So I cannot move until November, and this house opens in September. What am I, like, there's no way a landlord's just going to sit on it. So I end up calling them, talking to the other landlord, and he says, yeah, you can move in November, that's fine. And he's like, what's your rent? I'm like, oh, I just want you to know, like, it's not comparable to what's in the region. We've been in this house for 7 years. I'm pretty sure she's still giving us a deal. I think it might be because she knows that we're a pastor, like whatever. And he's like, yeah, you can pay whatever she's asking you to pay. It's fine.
Where's that?
It's probably between 500 and 600 square feet more than what we're in right now.
Wow.
They should be charging $1,200 to $1,500 more than what we're paying for our place right now. And in that quick of a moment, all of the questions that we've been having, Lord, why can't we find a place? We've looked everywhere. It was about a relationship of a relationship that God did this. And so we're moving. It's amazing. We're super amped. We're super excited. And it's wild, though, because it was like Dee had like 2 very specific things like on her list. Like she wanted room for the kids to run. It's just one of the things she said, room for the kids to run. And she's like, and I desperately need new storage space. And she's like, and if the laundry room was finished and not a creepy basement like most of them in this area, that would be so awesome. This place is stacked with storage. It is the nicest laundry room I think I've seen. And at the end of our row of townhouses, there's almost 3 football fields of green space for the neighborhood. Mind-blowing that God answered all the things, even though it didn't look like some of, the things she thought, like standalone house, she's from Alabama, she's not used to this city life. But it answered everything. And I'm like, this is all because you choose to be receptive rather than to think that it'll never happen, it will never come to you, and you'll never have enough. My hope for you guys is just to share 2 quick things, just a simple practicality in all of this, because you're like, how do we live this way? Famous theologian said, God's love towards human beings takes form as time shared with them. And so, like, how can we share some time with the Lord, like in the day? And this is my first suggestion. It's been a suggestion that I've said in other contexts, but the Lord brought it back to my memory. That when you get up in the morning, before you get out of your bed, you just sit there for a moment. And you determine some kind of prayer you're going to pray. It could be like a made-up prayer, like, hey, Jesus, I would really love to live in the life that Sabbath offers. Or it could be something like, hey, Jesus, I know that my life is formless and void, and darkness hovers over the face of my life. But would you hover over it? Would you speak a word? Would you finish that word, and would you rest?
Yeah, that's good.
Over me? So that I can have that life, a feeling that you've done the work and you've rested, and I can join you in that space. Or maybe it's a verse. Like I was thinking about what are some good verses that are connected to this. And one of the verses that came to mind was Psalm 24:1. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and all of those people who dwell in it. It's a great inhabiting mindset. That you sit there and you're going, hey, guess what? In whatever happens today, the whole earth is God's.
Yeah.
There is no one that's not His. Nowhere that's not His. It's all His. And every single person who's in it too. So whoever you're thinking of in your mind that you're like, ain't no life coming from that relationship. It's no receptivity here. Strong wall. Could you believe that God might be speaking through that person? Exactly what you need to hear if you're receptive and if you stay with Him in that life. Hard, not easy. But that's just a simple prayer. Now listen, if you're like, when I wake up in the morning, all I'm doing is growling for coffee. Then maybe it's like every stoplight. Hey, Jesus, would you send somebody today to throw some life at me? It can be simple. I know I say, hey, Jesus, a lot of my prayers. I just do. I don't know why. It's something in my life that I've just, hey, Jesus. But I think that there's a lot more life to be had. And that is the Sabbath reality that we're talking about.
Yeah.
That we begin to realize that God made us for life, not death. He made us for fullness, not scarcity. He made us for wholeness, not brokenness. And if we can believe that
Mm-hmm.
by just simply agreeing with what God's saying and stop saying all the things that we're saying, then maybe, just maybe, the relationships that are there with God, with others, with creation, would actually bring the life that we're looking for.
Yeah.
It's already there.
Mm-hmm.
My second suggestion is very funny and very silly. Ice, ice, baby.
Dun, 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 dun.
And I was thinking about when I'm in the middle of my life and the craziness of all the things, and I'm feeling the narrowness, I'm feeling, could I say, hey, Jesus, can we stop, collaborate, and listen? It's silly.
I love that.
But I really think there's something very Sabbath about those three things. Stop, collaborate, figure out if there's somebody you need to be doing something, working with, and listen.
Yeah.
And when you live that way, it's ice, ice, baby. It's chill. It's good. You know? It was just like a really funny thing that I wrote down, because I think a lot of us just need those little reminders. Stop, collaborate, and listen. Stop, collaborate, and listen. Because I think that if we begin to open our hearts up, our minds up, our ears up, I think we'll find out that living fully happens when I'm listening. When I'm open to receive whatever it is. It might not be words. It might be money. It might be a job. It might be an opportunity. It might be a spouse. Who knows that a friend of a friend could invite you to somebody and all of a sudden, boom, you're married. Like, be receptive. Throw everything off the table that's scarcity and vacating.
Yeah.
And put everything on the table that's life-giving. And life enthusiastically, manifesting in your heart and your mind. Like, there is just a gift in coming to that place with God and recognizing, yes, I can stop and I can be with God and I can be with others. And that's what the Sabbath is made for. That's creational living. And you perpetuate a life that is full of more life. And expands and extends more life. Because the other opportunity, the other alternative is to be stuck in a cycle of scarcity and emptiness. And unfortunately, it always ends in death.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you keep going back to death, you will find death.
Mm-hmm.
And if you keep running to life, life will be found.
Mm-hmm.
Come on.
So, Sabbath week 1. Would love to invite you all in to this crazy reality that life is full of relationships, it's full of God, it's full of people, and it's full of you being receptive. And if you can do that, you actually have the ability to help recreate the world with God and with others. Because this is what he came for. And I'm excited to talk next week a little bit as we get further into talking about what is the result of this kind of life. And the Hebrews, they call it manua. And we'll talk about that next week. What does it mean to live with the result of this relational, life-giving reality with God and others and receptivity with the world? I love you guys. I hope that was encouraging and challenging, because if it's not challenging, there's probably not enough life in it. See you guys next week. Have a great night. See you on Sunday. Sign up for Common Tables. Sign up for Marriage Plus. All the good things that are coming up that are going to bring life to you, because there's life to be found.